allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce, we have a quorum. I'm going to introduce everyone that's here. Jacqueline Scott is removed herself from the Planning and Zoning Board because I believe she's running for office. So Jacqueline Scott will not be here tonight, and we wish her good luck. My name is Brad Cohen. To my left, we have Jay Scheckman, John Barranco to my right, Michael Weymouth to my right, Steve Gannon, who's sitting down below in the seat in front of us, and William Rotella to my left. The first thing that we want to do is approve the minutes from last meeting. We have a motion. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we will approve the minutes from last meeting. We have the yearly election for the board chair and vice chair for this coming year. I am going to nominate Michael Weymouth.
I will second that nomination.
Either one of us.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Michael Weymouth is the man in charge. Do I let him now nominate? Do we go forward with the vice chair, or do I?
I'd like to make a nomination. I'd like to nominate Brad Cohen as vice chair.
I will accept. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Is that how we do it?
Yes, and now he can take over. It's
Good.
his time now.
Here you go.
Don't
my
forget the
musical
chairs.
mic, Mike.
I'm going to take my pen
Name
now.
tag.
I'm going to take my pen. I think I signed this already. I did. Yeah, I signed it already, so you can have that. And I will move this way.
Congratulations, Mike.
Yeah, you're gonna do great.
Yeah, right. Well, good evening, everyone. Let's take this for a test drive. I am flying blind, so I'm gonna need your guys' help as we go along. Keep me in the lanes, so to speak. Let's note that Mary Fertig has joined. Welcome. So, let's start off with, well, before we do the public swearing in and signing in, I don't see Ella. Can somebody please introduce who's here on behalf of the city tonight?
I think it's Jim.
Good evening, Jim Hetzel, Principal Urban Planner in for Ella Parker this evening. To my immediate left is Dwayne Spence, our Assistant City Attorney. To his left is Sherry Walden, also Assistant City Attorney. From staff, we have Yvonne Redding, Lorraine Tappan, and Nick Carlargos.
Great, thank you. And now we'll do, anybody that's going to speak, please stand and be sworn in.
If you're going to speak to the board today, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
All right.
Chairman Weymouth, would it be possible to move the case load around and have the last case brought?
I was eavesdropping on the previous chairman's instructions on that, so I agree with it, yes. Let's do that. We will start with, where are we starting with? Case number 5, is that the last one?
I think it's
Case number 5,
5.
item number 5, sorry. Case number UDP S21056. Before we hear from the applicant, let's go ahead and get disclosures. Jay, let's start with you down there, and we'll work across the dais, and we'll drop down below.
No disclosures.
Bill Rotella, no disclosures.
Brad Cohen, no disclosures except for when I spoke with the city prior to the meeting, but nothing about the actual case.
And I'll be recusing myself. Natalia Barranco is the landscape architect for this project. My sister.
Steve Gannon, site visit.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I visited the site, and I received a letter through Ella from the Neighborhood Association.
And I echo Mary, I also did a site visit, and I also received the same email.
I received the same email as well. Bill Rotella
imagine
received the
everybody-
email.
So I think before we get started, also, at the last meeting, we talked about making staff recommendations at the beginning of the meeting, part of every item, unless it's indicated differently. Do I recall that correctly? Or do we
Yes.
want to approve it at the beginning of every item?
I think
So if somebody wants to make a motion to attach staff,
So moved.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Jero Yates from FSMY Architects, 888 South Andrews Avenue in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, here on behalf of Hendricks Group LLC. I'm going to go through very quickly on this project to reserve my time for any specific questions that you may have. We're here today on a project called 10 Hendricks right now. It's a 16-unit condominium project located at 10 Hendricks Isle. This is a rendering of the front. It consists of 16 units, which is 4 units per floor, over a parking garage. This is a location map, as you can see, near the entrance of Hendricks Isle. And this is another view looking towards the east of the site. So the site is approximately 250 by 120 feet, about 0.68 acres, so it constitutes about 17 units per acre, or 17 units for density, but we're proposing 16 units. There are currently 19 units on site, so we should be reducing the water and sewer demands and the school capacity and traffic and other things associated with the project. One of the things that we talked about with the HOA as well as ownership is that they do want to pursue undergrounding the power lines that are on the site. So one of the things that we are doing is, in the discussions, if you can kind of see my mouse moving on the screen, but there's a power pole that starts here near the beginning and terminates right now. I think this is called the Meritage condos. It terminates in a terminal pole here. So ownership and our FP&L consultant has been working with the Meritage condos as well as the rest of FP&L to pursue undergrounding the power lines for that entire length. This is the general site plan, so you can see that we are requesting a pool in the rear setback along the waterway. We are providing 35 parking spaces where 34 is required. This is the landscape plan that John can't look at because his sister did it. Beautiful job. We are providing over the 35% required landscape area. And in terms of the modifications to the required yards, so we are a 55-foot high building with 27.5-foot setbacks or yards, and so we are requesting 25 on the front and rear, whereas we have 30 feet on the side yards, and we're proposing 5-foot unenclosed balconies to encroach into each of those setbacks. This is a view of the rear where you can see that we are proposing to have rooftop terraces for the top 4 units. And again, going back to the front of the project. Going back to the beginning, in terms of what some of the concerns that we heard from the HOA, they wanted a couple of things that they wanted us to focus on was the undergrounding of the power lines, which we're committed to try to do. And the second one, of course, had to do with construction. And so we are working with different, the ownership hasn't provided a contractor yet, but once they choose one, they wanted to choose a local one. We are working a contractor right now in Isle of Venice, and they've committed to, on that project, they've rented 15 spaces out of the Los Olos parking garage to shuttle back and forth to kind of alleviate parking on the street and ruining the swales and so forth. So the ownership is committed to trying to uphold that as well. And I'll reserve the rest of my time for any specific questions you may have.
Thank you. Is there anybody from is there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item? If so, please come to the dais or come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it in-house. Mary, do you have a question?
Yes. What was the date that the application was completed?
I don't remember the exact date, but we did request an extension to Yvonne for that. The 180 days, was it?
So maybe my question's really for Yvonne.
I'll have to look at my notes. I don't remember, but they did request the extension to the statute to get them through this meeting and then the 30-day call-up period.
Okay. All right, so we'll talk more about that later, I guess, but they've agreed to a 30-day call-up extension,
They've agreed. Yes.
if that were to happen.
Yes.
I'm planning on voting for it, but I'm asking you a question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from you before I go on? Anybody else on the board have any questions for the applicant?
I have a general question about the power pole. When you say it terminates, so we're looking at what you have on the screen there, and it terminates meaning that, does it go underground at that point, or for the rest of the aisle, or what happens there?
No, I don't believe so. Right now, I believe this condominium project here was committed to undergrounding their portion of the power lines. So I believe that it does definitely, there's a terminal pole here, meaning that it goes down here and then goes underground as it continues north. And I believe, Andre, right, I believe it does pop back up somewhere further north.
One more question. You're gonna laugh. Can I see the layout of the rooms,
Sure.
like where you showed them? The center rooms, the center units, does it look like the master bedroom has two separate bathrooms?
You're talking about this area here?
Yes, exactly.
Correct. Yeah. So there's like a her bathroom, if you will, and his bathroom here.
Okay, a huge her bathroom and a very tiny little his. Okay.
We are, yeah.
I just
We're biased, yes.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. I just needed to say that. Okay.
Hey, it could be, it doesn't have to be him and her. So.
Okay.
That is why we must.
Does it have a bidet?
Okay. There you go. Okay.
Are you getting ready to renovate your place or something? Your wife's sitting behind you about ready to stab you.
Well, looking at these, I need renovation on my place. That's for sure. Then This is a throwback. That's for sure.
All right, are there any more questions for the applicant, or are there any questions for staff? Hearing, seeing none, does somebody want to make a motion?
I'm going to move to approve it. I just want to make one comment. We've had a lot of conversation about Hendricks Isle, and I just commend you for working with the neighborhood association and with the neighbors and I noticed that you're asking for very minor modifications and in some areas going over what you're required to do. So thank you for that, and I move to approve.
So we have a motion, do we have a second?
Do you adopt the findings
Oh,
of
yes, I
fact in
brought
this?
that with me.
So I'm sorry if I missed it. Do we have public comment?
We
Yes.
opened it up and they decided not to speak.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I've been carrying around your motions all day.
That's okay. I can walk it over to you, but if you'd like, we could just say, do you adopt the findings of fact in the city staff report?
Yes, I do.
And do you agree with want to include all the staff conditions in the staff report in your approval? There are two staff conditions.
Thank you for reminding me, and the conditions that the neighborhood wrote to us about, but you've mutually agreed to those, I believe, so they should be in there.
Okay. Do you want to read those conditions on the record? Because I don't have them.
Do we have Ella's letter? Ella, the letter from W. Eisinger?
You don't have. I don't have that.
Okay. Bury the underground utility lines in front of their project, provide off-site and off-street parking for construction crews and subcontractors, hire off-duty police to facilitate traffic along the street while large construction materials are being delivered, maintain a clean development site, and limit the spread of debris, agree to incur the cost of any and all roadway, curbside, swale, and sidewalk damage as a result of construction. And as you know, this is right at the front of Hendricks Isle, and there is already a huge traffic problem on that street, so thank you. And you agreed to all of those with the neighborhood, it sounds
We
like.
do, yes.
Yes, okay.
I'll second.
May I read the resolution, Mike?
Yeah.
Chair, may I read the resolution? Okay. A resolution of the Planning and Zoning Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a site plan level 3 permit for 16 multifamily residential units along the Rio Grande waterway located at 10 Hendricks Isle, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and approving yard modifications for the front and rear yard setbacks and approving a waterway use. Case number UDP S21056.
Thank you. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any more comment before we vote on? Okay, if you would to call the roll?
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Furtick?
Yes.
Mr. Ghana?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
And Chair Weymouth?
Yes.
Pass 6-0.
All right, thank you. So let's go back up to the top of the order, and my question is, can we hear items 1 through 3 simultaneously, or do we have to hear them independently? And are we going to hear them? This has been deferred a couple of times, my recollection. But can we hear all 3 together?
Chair, the board has a prerogative of hearing the presentation together, but each item needs to be voted separately.
Got it. Thank you. All right. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Board, my name is Mike Vondermeulen with Keith. With me tonight, I have Unique with AECom, who are the designers of the police station, and Lieutenant Solomon with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. These 3 items are companion items to the applications that you heard in April. In April, we had the rezoning application as well as the site plan approval, and those are moving forward. These had a little bit of a lag trying to catch up with utility companies, county, whatnot, and so I'll go ahead and proceed through the presentation. The request is a right-of-way vacation, an alley vacation, and a plat. The alley is a 10-foot wide alley just off of Seminole Avenue, and then a portion of Southwest First Street, which currently is only 40 feet wide. These 2 right-of-ways actually flanked what was called Sweet Mornings apartment complex, which was purchased by the city and proposed for demolition. Here are some sketch and descriptions of the 2 right-of-ways that are being vacated. The vacations will allow the construction of the new police headquarters as proposed. The plat request, essentially we have 18.21 acres. There'll be 2 parcels. It's going to be restricted to 400,000 square feet of government complex. And there are also right-of-way dedications associated with the plat. Eventually, the plat will encompass this whole area here, including the Sweet Mornings property and the property being vacated. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, sir. Is there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item?
Disclosures.
I'm sorry?
We need to make disclosures, or we don't?
Do we need to make disclosures on that? You're probably the only person that got access to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department's grounds, so. Do we need to make disclosures to this?
You will need to make
We do? Okay,
disclosures
so
on.
Jay, let's start again with you, please.
I've never been called by the police.
No, but you may have been trying to get in.
No disclosures.
Bill Rotella, no disclosures.
Brad Cohen, just a site visit.
John Bronco, no disclosures.
Fly over. Mary?
I also visited the site, and thank you for all the signs. They were
Steve?
Steve Gannon, site visit from the outside.
Mike Weymouth, none. All right, sorry, thank you for reminding me on that.
And I'm just going to ask the same question I asked on the other, if I can. What date this application was completed?
I am not aware.
So that's a staff question of when staff determines that it's complete.
I'd
so
say it was at least before April, because this all was coming for us for quite a while.
Okay. I do not have that information.
My point was, obviously, have they agreed? I know the city's the applicant in this. Have they agreed mutually to extend the time if you're overtime, so that it's a full city process.
Oh, Joe, you want to?
No, I mean, we as agents representing the applicant, we will agree to that. And if we need to submit the extension request, we certainly will.
Okay, yeah, because it's been deferred a number of times, so I'm.
Correct, yes.
I just wanted to make sure.
All right, at this time, we'll close the public meeting, the public portion of the meeting, bring it back to the board. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant or city staff? Seeing none, let's move through these one at a time. Can I get a motion on case UDP V 22003?
Move to approve with the script here. Number one, I move to approve the resolution, approving case number UDPV 22003 based on the following findings of fact, which is the staff report and the testimony that we've heard tonight. And the board hereby, and I hereby find, or I recommend the board hereby finds that the application meets the standards and requirements in the ULDR and criteria for the proposed use as cited in the resolution.
For this one, we don't do a resolution at this level because it's a recommended approval. That's on page 2, but that's great. Thank you. And
Mary believes in overkill.
Do I have to say it again?
no, we just clarified. It's not a resolution. It's a recommendation for
yes,
approval,
yes, I've
and
got
you're
it.
including all
I've
staff
got it.
conditions
Don't
in your
worry,
approval.
I've got your
Great,
cheat sheet.
great.
Mary was just seeing if you were paying attention.
Yes.
Nice job. You passed Mary's test. I'll second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Furtick?
Yes?
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
And Chair Weymouth?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Wonderful. Thank you. Case number UDP V 22004. Somebody like to make a motion?
Do you want to read it off the sheet? This is vacation of right of.
You're making the motion?
Yeah, I'll recommend to approval. I recommend to approval of case number that Mike just read, based on the following findings of fact, the facts in the city staff report, and the testimony heard by the applicant. And the board hereby finds that the application meets the applicable criteria of the ULDR cited in the staff report.
Do I hear a second?
Do you include all the
Oop.
conditions
And
in
I
the staff
include-
report?
And we recommend the approval of the application is subject to the conditions included in the staff report.
Great, thank you.
Do I hear a second?
Second. Oh, good. They got it.
Okay. Any additional comment before we take it to a vote? Please call the roll.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Furtick?
Yes.
And Chair Weymouth?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Okay. You all been so good. We're going to move on to the last case of the evening. Case number UDP.
The
L2
plat, Mike, the plat still has to be voted on.
Third item.
UDP P22003.
Oh, we didn't just do that? I'm sorry.
No.
Yes. All right, well, have not all been good. We're going to hear one more. So, case number UDP P22003. Somebody want to make a motion, Mary?
Yeah, motion to recommend approval. I move to recommend approval of the case that Mike just read based on the following findings of fact, the city staff report, and the testimony heard by the board. And the board hereby finds that the application meets the applicable criteria of the ULDR cited in the report. The board recommends approval of any staff recommendations or conditions that were in the report.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion before we go to a vote? Please call the roll.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Fertig?
Yes.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
And Chair Weymouth?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're on to case UDP L22002.
Good evening. This
Ms.
is a
Tappan.
fairly straightforward item. The city's Public Works Department is proposing to construct a new potable water treatment at 59 Hawkins Road. It's a city-owned property. The land use of that property, the future land use designation, is employment center. As you know, in the future land use element, each of the land uses are defined, and each property has a future land use designation. So we took a look at that in future land use designation, and it turns out that employment center doesn't actually allow utilities. Similar land use designations such as commercial, office park, and commercial recreation actually do allow utilities. So we're proposing to amend the future land use element to add utilities as a permitted use in the employment center future land use designation.
Okay. As a matter of formality, is there anybody here from the public that would wish to speak on this? Seeing none, literally none. We'll bring it back, close the public hearing. Is there anybody on the board that would like to ask a question?
I would. Are we changing the comprehensive plan for all of that type of use, employment center, just for one site? I mean, why didn't we just do some sort of a waiver variance or something for that one site?
Yeah, one option might have been to have changed the future land use designation for this property. But actually a simpler, straightforward method was to add this use to the employment center. And yes, that means that other land uses, properties with that future land use designation would have utilities as a permitted use. At the same time, each property then not only has to confirm, we have to confirm that the future land use designation would allow any utility. Also, the zoning has to permit a utility as well. And so, whichever use comes in for these properties, particularly if it's adjacent to residential, they have to go through neighborhood compatibility requirements and so forth. So there's a lot of sections of the ULDRs that will protect existing residential neighborhoods and not allow utilities to be constructed anywhere in the city with that future land use designation.
Thank you. One more question. Oh, gosh, it's not a page number. Where the proposed amendment page, where I'm seeing the uses listed 1 through 13, and we're adding 14 to it, it says utilities, comma, excluding except electric power plants. Grammar-wise, I'm having trouble understanding.
Double negative. I was going to ask the same
Yeah,
thing.
okay.
You're right. We can correct that. We can do utilities excluding electric power plants.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Wasn't me. All right, thank you.
No, and
I have a question. What was the impetus for this change?
it's the proposed potable water treatment plant
Okay.
on Hawkins Road, which is just west of the Executive Airport.
The new water plant, right, that's going to be
The
built?
new water plant,
The new
yes.
water plant,
Yeah.
city water plant.
Okay. Thank you.
The P3.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, does somebody want to make a motion?
This one's really easy. I just recommend, I move to recommend approval of the amendment to the comprehensive plan, case number such and such. I'm going to give you my cheat sheet so you can.
And if we can clarify that that's the language as modified in the record, utilities excluding electric power plant.
That's exactly what I meant. I read the wrong one, I guess.
Anything else before we ask for a second? Any second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion before we take it to a vote? Please call the roll.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Ferdig?
Yes.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
And Chair Weymouth?
Yes.
Passed 7-0.
Motion passes. That takes us on to the exciting part of the night. Anybody have any communication to the city commission?
I have a question. It's not a communication. All right, is this, you want me to wait till you finish your communications?
If you wait, I won't be here.
I just had asked Ella, and I'm just asking you all if you could just give us an explanation of the time required between the completion of an application when a completion by staff is considered, and what that means. And then I'm going to probably ask if we can have that included in the report so that we know if the application has been completed or there is a mutual agreement to take it through the process. And just so you all know, if you didn't follow this, there was a case recently that we heard when it was called up. So the point being, I don't want to do anything wrong, so I just want to know that when something comes before us, it has time to go through the complete city planning process. Do you want to just explain that to us real quick, and then I can make that recommendation?
Sure. Dwayne Spence, Assistant City Attorney. Pursuant to Florida Statute 166.033, within 30 days of receiving an application for a development permit or development order, a municipality must review the application for completeness and then issue a letter indicating all information that's required to or that makes the application deficient. Once that letter is submitted to the applicant has 30 days in which to address the deficiencies and submit the required information. In a normal process, it's 120 days from the time the municipality deems the application complete to the time that they would have to go to final action on that application. When the process includes a quasi-judicial hearing or public hearing, it's 180 days from the time that an application is deemed complete to the time that a final action needs to be taken by the board. With applications that are processed by, and this applies to applications that are processed by a certified professional, like an architect and engineer, and the municipality and the back and forth with regards to the review for application completeness can only do that 3 times. After the 3rd time, it needs to go forward for a final action by the board. With regards to the obligation of this board, there's no obligation for you all that you need to be aware of or take unless there is a request for a deferral. That's the only consideration that you would have with regards to the time period, and we would advise you at that time that without a waiver from the applicant, that the board would need to take an action on that item or risk violation of the statute.
So could you start telling us how long it's been? I mean, I'm assuming is it staff that deems that the application is complete?
Yes.
So the staff knows that date.
But
Correct.
Isn't that on the backup that we get? I mean, I've never looked for it, so I'm like
actually-
everybody else. I'm thinking, I don't know.
Actually, no.
It isn't?
I looked on one of these and didn't see it, and you heard me ask tonight,
I
when
know.
one we heard it and one we didn't. And they have the ability to mutually agree, is my understanding, to extend that date so that it can go through the process. Is that correct? They can give a waiver?
They can request make a reasonable request for an extension of time, yes.
So the problem would be if we're on right at the end on a site level 3 of a thing and it doesn't, I think it's a disservice to the public for them not to have the ability to go to their elected officials and have the elected officials weigh in if they want to.
So I have to assume that an easy way to resolve this, Mary, is when they prepare the agenda, just have one more line item put on each case that has the application date,
Exactly.
a specific date that's here that you look at that you know.
That's exactly what I'm at.
Is that something that can be done?
It can be done, but the question is, what are you going to do with that information? Because your review of an application is based on the criteria in the code. What I would be concerned about is the board telling an applicant that they need to provide the waiver or their development permit would be denied. And
Well, if you just said if us deferring it was going to throw it out, you were going to say something. I don't see that so I was like Mike, I thought for years it was in there, and on one of them I found it and one I didn't. But I don't see what the harm is until it's when the application was completed. If it's
as I say,
required by statute,
there's no harm.
it's public record. I mean, it's not.
Right.
It's not like we're asking for something that's not public record.
I hear what Dwayne is saying, and I think that the simple solution is that we could move to have that included as part of the application for the benefit of the public, so that they can understand, not having anything to do with any determinations that we'll be making at the meeting.
That simply can be done. I mean, staff can provide the completion letters as part of your backup. There's a formal letter that is sent, or email in some cases.
Okay. Does that work?
Yes, especially if there's a formal letter, I would think it would be in here, so thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Or
Chairman.
go to the-
Along those same lines, so does that mean that we'll know that a project has gotten some extensions and what the final date of the latest extension is? Is that what you're asking for, Mary? You want to know when it was applied for, but if there were extensions.
Well, just look at the police station. We've had several deferrals tonight. So all that does is it just tells us, and he said, we've mutually agreed, right? So that's fine. That answers the question. I just think it's an extra, I think it's just a precaution to keep all of us on the right place and make sure that we don't miss a date because the letter's in there.
So that everyone is aware of the statute, and in the process, the city kind of deals with the same players, and is assumed when it was assumed through the process that these waivers were being granted, and in this particular case, the statute was used as a sword, and unfortunately, it kind of, brought staff to where we lawyers are always at, which is get it in writing, let's go by the books versus, hey, this is a developer or a representative that we deal with on a regular basis, and we understand this DRC process is a back and forth. Staff understands that is not the case anymore. So.
Yeah, and I'm not, and I just want everybody on staff to know, I'm not in any way thinking you all haven't done anything. So I just think it's helpful as one more piece of information to have that in the packet.
It's relevant. I mean, it's relevant to where it is in the process, and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't speak for staff with regards to providing that information.
It might make sense more than just putting the application initiation date back up in the form. It might make sense to actually put in the staff report what the timing is for the benefit of the public.
That's
Put it somewhere where we can see it and be done with it.
But will we be seeing, what we really want to see is the current expiration date, right? Is that what we really are interested in? What we're reviewing here, what is the expiration date of however many extensions we've had?
If I may, Jim Hetzel.
Is that what we're asking? I'm getting confused.
I would say yes, but it's not that we're asking for that for us. It's just that we're asking for it to be public knowledge for people to be able to, see the truth for what it is.
And plus which, it helps, I think it helps for us to show that, like we had one case that was before us, I can't even remember how many times it was deferred to the point where we're like, if you're not going to move on, could we just stop deferring this? But I think it helps to call attention, and almost everything you do, in that time. I just think it helps everybody to keep tabs on it. So it's just a small thing.
If I may, Jim Hetzel, staff is tracking the dates. What we can do is on the staff reports in the table that gives you the dimensional standards and so forth, we can add a line item that has the date on there of when they were going to reach the 180 days. So basically their expiration date, or if they got an extension, what that expiration date extension is. Where it'll come really important, I think I heard it mentioned about any deferments. That's where the time, if the applicant is asking for another 3 months, that's where you would have to, as a board, be aware of their extension dates and their deadline dates. So we can add that to the staff report, no problem.
Yep, that's it. That's what I was asking.
And I'm curious, just as part of this conversation, if they have some sort of like deadline date, can they also agree on the record to waive that deadline date?
They can, when we send out a determination of completeness, which is in an email format, we've been letting applicants know what their choices are and either asking for an extension at that time or a waiver at that time. Or it'll be something down the road that they can ask for. So we let the applicant know at that time, here are your options, and we're going to be tracking it basically as we move forward.
And
Okay.
if we say, hey, we would recommend a deferral of the item and it's at risk of their clock running out, can we as a board, ask if they'll agree?
In a circumstance like that, it would be appropriate to advise them that you would need a waiver. If you wanted to defer the item for more information, what I would typically advise you of the time period that the time for final action would expire. And then at that time, you can elicit a request for a waiver from the applicant on the record at the meeting. And if they refuse to do so, then the board can only base their decision that night based on the information available to them. So the fact that you're asking for additional information kind of suggests that a denial would be warranted, and the applicant should be aware of that.
I think that's all important.
Okay, I'm going to move on quickly so we don't belabor that anymore. Mr. Bronco, you got something?
Yep. I've been meaning to ask staff about this and, be sure it's in our purview. There's another issue kind of related to what you were talking about, Mary, but completely different. And I've always had a hard time understanding the residential unit allocation and how all of that is divvied up and how some developers apply and get 300 units and other developers get 200. And eventually this pool is gone in certain districts. And it seems like some districts have no units, other districts did have units, but now they're all gone. And then I'm finding out there are some districts that are basically sitting on units and not developing them and not stealing, but basically speaking up for without going through a formal process. And as the Planning and Zoning Board, I feel like either we have to tighten up and make it fair for different districts.
These are flex units, aren't they, Jim?
Well, some of it's flex. There's like 3 different types. So I want to understand it overall because there were some projects mentioned recently, and I'm not going to get into specifics because we're not discussing a specific case, but there are cases in where a developer could potentially bypass a lot of the regular requirements that everybody else goes through to reserve these units for their development without going through the same process and coming through Planning and Zoning Board. That's one instance. The other instance is when you look at different parts of the rack, and some parts of the rack have no units. I mean, you could change every zoning code. You could change the height limitations, which was brought before commission recently. You could change the densities, but there's no units. So it's a waste of time. We could do, all these changes to the code, but if we don't have control of that as staff, as the Planning and Zoning Board, I feel like, this allocation of units, it's like the Wild West. People are sneaking around and there isn't a set way of getting them. And I'd like for staff to explain how it's different now and what's the regular way of doing it.
Can we let them prepare for that for next month?
And it might take a
Because
formal
I'd like to know how many
presentation.
units there are out there as well as we
We
I
can
would
prepare.
love a presentation, and I know Jim Hetzel does a good job on that particular one.
And he's done it before, yeah, I've heard it
Jim
before.
is. That's fine. If the board is desire of a presentation, we can prepare that for the next meeting, kind of go over, because your question is very loaded.
I
There's a lot
know,
of moving
there's a,
parts.
yeah,
So
agreed.
that'd be fine. We could put some slides together and present to you at the next meeting.
It's very loaded, but it was kind of a, soft shoot question too, because I'm not mentioning specifics, but I'd like to see how it's divvied up. And then as a board, when we're looking at the comprehensive plan and future development, let's address it. If we need to start pushing for additional units in certain districts because they've been left behind, or they've been starved because a central district has all the units and starve that district, that's one thing we should look at. If there are other districts that aren't even in that area who are sucking up all the units so that every other developer is left holding the bag, meaning they've got a property they can't develop because one guy is going to sit on it for the next 5 or 10 years for the next cycle, I don't think that's fair either.
All right.
So there's a lot of things about it that bother me, and I feel like a lot of that's happening behind our backs, and if we are the board responsible to enforce the development code, right? And we're responsible to write the code based on the comprehensive plan, I think we should be very aware of what's going on.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll be glad to present on that. I think there's, again, a lot of moving parts. It's a loaded question because there are approval processes that this board has approved to allow certain development process to go through, like for downtown, for instance, is more expeditious of a review, where they don't have to come to the planning and zoning board unless there's another requirement that triggers it. So downtown flex units, if you will, does not come to the planning and zoning board, but a flex unit project or mixed-use project requesting flex, say on US 1, would come in front of the planning and zoning board. So there's a lot of those nuances in our code, and I'll be glad to kind of give an overview at the next meeting if you wish.
Thank you.
So Jim, can you give us a brief presentation next month on
That's
this?
fine.
I mean, it doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out thing, but to just understand what the inventories are and the absorption. I get that
Sure.
they don't all come before us, but if all of a sudden we start seeing units dropping out the back door, and we're up here making uninformed decisions. The other thing that I would ask, if possible, before that presentation, maybe a few days or even a week, or even with the package, if you could circulate what you're getting, so that we
Yep,
can get
absolutely.
as prepared as possible. That way we don't belabor it.
And Jim, and this is where I was trying to tie back to dates, right? And I know there's extensions filed by the state, and we don't want to get in a piss and match with the state. But I'd also like to find out how many of these developers are sitting on 500 units and how long have they been sitting on 500 units? Because that's something we need to address. Because if I have a property next door that's blighted and the guy's just sitting on it, 5, 10 years and does nothing, and I've got somebody else down the street who's super motivated and is going to do a great quality project, but there's no units available, there's got to be a way to keep things moving.
When it comes to state extensions,
Symbols project was the case in point that we,
Well,
We end up getting
I'm not
There is,
discussing.
but I'm just saying, but he got them, he sat on them for 10 years and everybody scrambled
Yeah.
to get them.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal Jim's thunder, but I do think that there are state statutes that, emergency orders that the governor.
Oh, I stole my own thunder. I mean, I
Yeah.
mentioned it. So, yeah, I know we got to work with the state, but
Okay.
You got a hurricane
I'd like to
thing.
understand it.
Yeah.
And to be sure they're playing within the rules of the state because, maybe they exceeded that. Maybe we were more gracious than the state even was. So who knows?
Good point.
All right. Very good. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Should I check and see if there's a motion for that?
I think it's a motion to adjourn, probably.
I find the findings of fact. Yeah.